Hi, everyone. Welcome. You found a quiet place tonight, and we're so glad you're here. There's nowhere else you need to be right now. Nothing else you need to do. You can simply rest and listen and let the words wash over you, slowly and gently, like a warm tide coming in. Tonight, we're going to talk about something that touches every single moment of your life. Something so familiar, so woven into who you are, that you probably don't even notice it most of the time. We're going to talk about habits, how they form, how they live inside your body and your brain, and why they are, in many ways, one of the most beautiful and quietly remarkable things about being human. We'll move slowly through the science together, pausing often, letting ideas settle in, like leaves drifting down to the surface of still water. There is no rush here. There is no test at the end. There is only this calm, quiet journey through some of the most peaceful and fascinating science about how we, as humans, learn to do things again and again without even thinking about it. So whenever you're ready, find a comfortable position. Let your body settle. Let your eyes close if they want to, and simply listen. We can take a moment to notice how still everything feels right now. Let's begin. Fact 1. The human brain is a remarkably efficient organ, and one of the ways it saves energy is through something called habit formation. When you do something for the very first time, your brain works quite hard. It pays close attention. It uses a lot of its resources to guide you through every small step of whatever you're doing. But when you do something again, and again, and again, over time, your brain begins to recognize the pattern. It starts to automate it. It stores the sequence of actions in a part of the brain that runs quietly in the background, almost like a program that starts itself. Scientists call this process automatization, and it means that the brain, over time, requires less and less conscious effort to complete a familiar task. The energy that was once spent thinking through every step is freed up for other things, and so the brain, in its gentle wisdom, builds habits to take care of the familiar so that you can rest a little more. Slowly, gently. Fact 2. Deep inside the brain, nestled beneath the outer layers of thinking and feeling, there is a small, curved structure called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is involved in forming new memories, and interestingly, it also plays a quiet role in the early stages of habit formation. When you first begin to learn a new routine, the hippocampus helps hold on to the details of what you're doing. Almost like taking careful notes, it remembers the sequence, the order of things, the feeling of each step. But as the habit becomes more established, the brain gradually shifts the storage of that routine to a different area, a deeper, older part of the brain, and the hippocampus can step back. It can let go. It knows the habit is safe now, stored somewhere more permanent. And there's something very calming about that. The idea that the brain gently passes knowledge along, like a trusted handoff, so that each part can rest when its work is done. Fact 3. There is a structure in the brain called the basal ganglia, and it sits deep within, calm and ancient, like a quiet engine room. The basal ganglia is one of the most important places in the brain when it comes to habits. It receives information, processes patterns, and helps store the sequences of actions that we repeat often. Scientists have discovered that even in animals with very simple nervous systems, something like the basal ganglia exists, which tells us that this kind of automatic, habit-based learning is very, very old. It is one of the oldest strategies the brain has ever used to make life easier. And there's something deeply comforting about that, knowing that the quiet formation of habits isn't just something humans do. It's something life itself has been doing for an extraordinarily long time, slowly building patterns, gently automating the familiar, softly making room for rest. Fact 4. When researchers study how habits form in the brain, they often look at something called neural pathways, which are like little roads that signals travel along inside your brain. When you do something for the first time, the signal has to find its way through unfamiliar territory. It's a little like walking through tall grass. There's no clear path, and it takes effort. But when you do the same thing again, the grass is pressed down just slightly. A faint trail begins to form. Do it again, and the trail becomes a little clearer. Over weeks and months of repetition, that trail becomes a well-worn path, and eventually, a smooth, clear road. The signal can travel along it quickly and easily, almost without any effort at all. Scientists call this process synaptic strengthening, and it is, in its quiet way, the physical story of how a habit is written into the brain. A gentle road, built one step at a time, and we can take a moment to notice how gradual and patient that process is. Fact 5. One of the gentlest findings in habit science is that the brain does not distinguish very much between habits it considers good and habits it considers neutral or unhelpful. From the brain's perspective, a habit is simply a pattern that has been repeated enough times to become automatic. The brain doesn't judge. It doesn't evaluate. It simply stores what has been practiced. And this, in a way, is a very neutral and accepting thing. The brain treats the habit of brushing your teeth with the same quiet efficiency as any other repeated pattern. It stores what you give it. It honors what you practice, which means that the brain is always, patiently, waiting to be shaped. It is always ready to begin building a new path. Whenever you choose to start walking down one, that quiet readiness, that gentle openness, is one of the most hopeful things about how the brain works. Fact 6. Scientists who study behavior have described something called the habit loop, a simple, elegant cycle that underlies almost every automatic behavior we have. The loop has 3 quiet parts. The first is called the cue, which is a small signal from the world around you, or from inside you, that tells your brain, it's time. The second part is the routine, the actual behavior itself, unfolding step by step, almost without your having to think about it. And the third part is the reward, the small sense of completion, or comfort, or pleasure, that follows the routine. This loop cue, routine, reward, repeats itself so many times that eventually the brain begins to anticipate the reward, even before the routine begins. And that anticipation is part of what keeps the loop turning. Gently, quietly, over and over. Understanding this loop doesn't make habits less remarkable. It makes them more so. Fact 7. The cue in a habit loop can be almost anything. A time of day, a place, a feeling, another person, or even a sequence of actions that leads naturally into the next one. Researchers have found that location is one of the most powerful cues of all. When you are in a particular place, your brain quietly searches its memory for what it usually does there. A kitchen can cue the habit of making tea. A desk can cue the habit of opening a notebook. A pillow can cue the habit of relaxing. The environment around you is speaking to your habits all the time, in a language so quiet you can barely hear it. And when you understand this, you begin to notice how gently the world around you shapes what you do, without you even realizing. The places you spend time are, in a very soft way, part of who you are. There is no need to rush. Fact 8. Researchers have found that habits are particularly likely to form around what scientists call stable contexts, meaning environments or times of day that stay consistent. When the world around you is predictable and calm, the brain finds it easier to build automatic routines. This is part of why morning routines are so common. The early hours of the day tend to be quiet and similar from one day to the next. And in that gentle consistency, the brain finds it easy to build habits. The same sequence of actions, in the same calm setting, day after day, becomes deeply automatic. And so the morning, for many people, is a kind of soft, rehearsed choreography that the brain has lovingly memorized, a quiet dance that the body knows by heart, before the rest of the world has even woken up. Fact 9. The neurotransmitter dopamine plays a gentle and interesting role in habit formation. Dopamine is often described as the brain's reward chemical. And while that's a little simplified, it's not wrong. When something good happens, dopamine is released, and the brain takes note. It wants to remember whatever led to that good feeling. It wants to increase the chances of that happening again. And so dopamine quietly reinforces the connections between a cue, a routine, and a reward. Over time, as a habit becomes established, scientists have discovered something wonderful. The dopamine release begins to shift. Instead of coming after the reward, it comes earlier and earlier in the loop, until eventually, just encountering the cue is enough to trigger a small, gentle wave of dopamine. The brain is, in its own quiet way, looking forward to what it knows is coming. Fact 10. There is a beautiful phenomenon in habit research called chunking, and it describes something the brain does almost instinctively when it encounters a repeated sequence of actions. Instead of storing each individual action as a separate memory, the brain begins to group them together into a single, smooth chunk. Brushing your teeth isn't remembered as pick up the toothbrush, apply toothpaste, begin brushing upper left, then upper right. It becomes simply brush teeth, one smooth, unified memory, one gentle command. That unfolds automatically once it begins. Chunking makes habits faster and more reliable. And it's the reason why a habitual action can feel almost effortless. The brain has already done the organizing for you. It has quietly bundled everything together and handed it to you like a neatly folded gift, ready to use. Slowly, gently. Fact 11. One of the questions people ask most often about habits is, how long does it take to form one? And the answer, it turns out, is more gentle and more varied than most people expect. A commonly quoted figure is 21 days, but this comes from a very old and loosely interpreted observation, not from careful scientific study. A much more thorough piece of research, conducted at University College London, followed people as they tried to build new habits, and found that on average, it took around 66 days for a behavior to become truly automatic. But the range was wide, from as few as 18 days for very simple habits, to over 200 days for more complex ones. And there's something comforting in that range. There is no single deadline. There is no failing if it takes longer. The brain moves at its own quiet pace, building slowly, steadily, in its own time. Fact 12. Repetition is the quiet heartbeat of habit formation. Every time you repeat a behavior, the neural connections associated with that behavior grow just slightly stronger. It's a gradual process, unhurried and steady, like the slow growth of a tree. You can't see it happening in any single moment, but over days and weeks and months, the change accumulates. Scientists describe this with a phrase that has become something of a quiet poem in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Each repetition causes the neurons involved in the behavior to fire at the same time, and each time they fire together, the connection between them grows a little stronger. a little more reliable, a little more permanent, until one day, the path is so well worn that the behavior simply happens, almost on its own, as if it had always been there. Fact 13. Sleep, it turns out, plays a deeply important role in habit formation. And there's something quietly wonderful about learning this. As you drift towards sleep yourself, while you sleep, the brain does something remarkable. It reviews and consolidates the experiences and patterns of the day. Memories are strengthened, connections are reinforced, and the early, fragile traces of new habits are gently solidified during the night. Researchers have found that people who sleep well, after practicing a new skill, retain it much better than those who don't. The brain uses the quiet hours of sleep, those slow, dark, gentle hours, to do some of its most important work. It is building pathways while you rest. It is weaving new patterns into the fabric of who you are. Even as you lie still, sleep is not empty time. It is one of the most productive and gentle things your brain ever does. And we can take a moment to notice how restful and productive this moment already is. Fact 14. There's a concept in habit science called the automaticity curve, which is a gentle way of describing how the effort required to perform a behavior changes over time. At the beginning of learning something new, automaticity is low. You have to think quite carefully. You have to pay attention. The effort is noticeable, but as you repeat the behavior, automaticity slowly rises. The curve climbs, and as it climbs, the effort required falls. Less and less conscious thought is needed. Less and less energy is spent, until the behavior sits near the top of the curve, where it is almost entirely automatic, almost entirely effortless. The curve never quite reaches absolute zero effort. There is always a small whisper of awareness, but it comes close, close enough that the behavior feels as natural as breathing, as quiet and reliable as a heartbeat. Fact 15. One of the most peaceful findings in the science of habits is that missing a single day does not ruin the formation of a new one. Researchers who tracked people building habits found that occasional lapses, a missed morning walk, a forgotten routine, had very little impact on the overall trajectory of habit formation. The curve kept climbing, the automaticity kept growing. A single missed repetition is like a single missed raindrop. In a long, slow season of rain, the ground is still becoming saturated. The process is still underway, and knowing this, there's something very gentle and forgiving about how the brain works. It does not punish a single missed day. It does not reset to zero. It simply waits, patiently, for you to continue, ready to pick up exactly where you left off. Fact 16. Interestingly, habits are not stored in any single part of the brain. They are distributed across multiple regions, each contributing something to the smooth performance of an automatic behavior. The basal ganglia provides the core sequence. The prefrontal cortex, the thinking, planning part of the brain at the front, monitors for anything unusual and can override the habit if needed. The cerebellum helps with the precise timing and coordination of physical movements. And the amygdala, the brain's quiet emotional center, adds the feeling tone, the sense of comfort, or calm, or familiarity that accompanies a well-established habit. So a habit, in its full richness, is not just a memory, it is a whole brain collaboration, a quiet symphony, with many instruments, all playing together in perfect, practiced harmony. There is no need to rush. Fact 17. Scientists have noticed something called the habit interference effect, which describes what happens when two habits share a very similar cue. If two behaviors are both triggered by the same signal, the brain can sometimes become briefly confused about which one to run. It's a very gentle kind of confusion, not distressing at all, and the brain usually resolves it quickly by running whichever habit is stronger, or whichever was performed most recently. But this phenomenon tells us something interesting about how habits are organized in the brain. They are not entirely isolated from each other. They exist in a kind of quiet conversation, loosely connected by their shared cues and contexts. The brain is always, gently and invisibly, managing many habits at once, keeping them organized, making sure the right one runs at the right time. Fact 18. There is a quiet distinction in habit science between what researchers call declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. Declarative knowledge is knowing that something is true, like knowing that riding a bicycle involves balancing and pedaling. Procedural knowledge is knowing how to do something, like actually being able to ride the bicycle without thinking about it. Habits live in the world of procedural knowledge. They are not things you know about. They are things you know how to do. And what makes this fascinating is that procedural knowledge can exist even when declarative knowledge is impaired. People with certain kinds of memory loss can still perform their habitual routines, even if they can't consciously remember learning them. The body remembers what the mind has forgotten. The habit lives on, quietly and faithfully, in a place beyond words. Fact 19. Researchers have found that context change, moving to a new home, starting a new job, beginning a new season of life, can be a surprisingly gentle opportunity for building new habits. This is because old cues are disrupted. The familiar signals that used to trigger old routines are no longer present in the new environment. The brain, finding itself in unfamiliar territory, is briefly more open, more flexible, more ready to form new associations. Scientists call this the fresh start effect in one context, and the habit discontinuity hypothesis in another. Both describe the same quiet truth, that new beginnings, even small ones, can loosen the grip of old patterns, just enough to let new ones begin to root. Change, even when it feels uncertain, carries within it a quiet invitation to begin again, slowly, gently. Fact 20. One of the most remarkable things about habits is how persistent they are once formed, even when a habit hasn't been practiced. For months or years, it can return very quickly, with the right cue. Scientists call this savings, the idea that the brain has saved the neural pathway, like a road that has been closed, but not demolished. The grass grows back a little. The path becomes faint, but it is still there, underneath. And when the cue appears again, the path reopens with surprising speed. Former smokers sometimes find old habits stirred by a familiar smell or social situation. Years after quitting, former athletes find their bodies remembering complex movements they haven't practiced in decades. The brain holds on to what it has built, quietly, faithfully, for a very long time. Fact 21. The body itself participates in habit formation in ways that go beyond the brain. Muscles, over time, develop something researchers loosely call muscle memory, which is really a kind of deep procedural learning, distributed throughout the nervous system. When you practice a physical movement repeatedly, a piano chord, a handwriting style, a way of walking, not only does the brain's neural pathway for that movement strengthen, but the muscles involved also become more efficient at performing it. The nerve signals travel a little faster. The muscle fibers respond a little more precisely. It's a quiet, whole-body learning process, not just a mental one. And this is part of why skilled physical habits, playing an instrument, swimming, typing, can feel almost as natural as breathing. The body has learned, deeply, and in its own quiet way. Fact 22. The gut, sometimes called the body's second brain, may also play a quiet role in habitual behavior. The enteric nervous system, a vast network of neurons lining the digestive tract, communicates constantly with the brain above, and researchers are beginning to explore how gut microbiome composition, the community of tiny organisms living in the digestive system, may influence mood, motivation, and even the ease with which certain habits form and sustain themselves. The science here is still young and gentle, more questions than answers, but the possibility that the microbes living quietly in your gut might gently nudge the ease of habit formation is one of the most softly astonishing ideas in modern biology. The body's wisdom runs deeper and more quietly than we ever imagined, and we can take a moment to notice how many quiet systems are at work inside you right now. Fact 23. Stress hormones, particularly cortisol, have an interesting and gentle relationship with habit formation. Under mild, manageable stress, the brain can sometimes form habits more quickly. The stress signals the brain that this situation matters, and the brain responds by paying closer attention and strengthening connections faster. But under chronic or very high stress, the opposite can happen. High and sustained cortisol levels can interfere with the prefrontal cortex, the thoughtful, flexible part of the brain, and push the brain toward more rigid, habitual behavior patterns, even when they're not helpful. This is part of why people under great stress sometimes fall back into old habits. The brain, under pressure, reaches for what it already knows. It reaches for the well-worn path, because the well-worn path feels safe. Fact 24. Interestingly, the reward part of the habit loop doesn't always have to be something obvious or external. Internal rewards, a quiet sense of satisfaction, a feeling of calm, a gentle sense of having done something that feels right, are just as powerful for habit formation as external ones. In fact, researchers have found that habits built around internal rewards tend to be more durable over time. They don't depend on anything outside of you. The reward lives within the act itself. The quiet pleasure of completing a morning routine, the soft satisfaction of a good night's rest. After a day of calm, steady effort, these internal feelings gently reinforce the loop, and the habit grows, rooted not in external prizes, but in the quiet richness of how it feels to live well, and steadily, and with care. Fact 25. The prefrontal cortex, that thoughtful, deliberate region at the front of the brain, is responsible for something researchers call executive function. This includes planning, decision-making, and the ability to override automatic responses when necessary. Interestingly, the prefrontal cortex is one of the last parts of the brain to fully mature. It doesn't reach full development until the mid-20s, and this gives us a soft window into why habits formed in childhood and adolescence can be so particularly persistent. They form during a period when the habit-forming machinery of the brain is active and hungry, and the overriding, reflective part of the brain hasn't yet fully developed. The brain of a young person is, in a very quiet sense, particularly ready to be shaped, particularly open to the quiet repetitions that become the foundations of a lifetime. There is no need to rush. Fact 26. There is a concept in behavioral science called implementation intention, which is a gentle and surprisingly powerful technique for building new habits. It involves planning not just what you want to do, but when and where you will do it. I will take a short walk after dinner, in the garden, before it gets dark. Research has found that people who form these specific, quiet plans are significantly more likely to follow through on their intentions than those who simply decide they want to do something without specifying the context. The brain, it seems, benefits from being given a specific cue to look for, a precise moment, a particular place. When those conditions are gently specified in advance, the habit has a clearer door to walk through, a softer, more welcoming place to begin. Fact 27. The morning hours, many researchers have observed, tend to be a particularly fertile time for habit formation. This is partly because willpower and executive function, the brain's capacity for deliberate, effortful choices, tend to be at their highest early in the day, before the accumulated demands of the hours have gently depleted them. As the day goes on, making deliberate choices becomes, for most people, progressively more effortful. The brain tires a little, just as the body does, and so habits that are placed in the morning, in the quiet early hours, benefit from the full, rested attention of the brain. They are practiced when the brain is most receptive, most patient, most gently ready to build something new and lasting. Fact 28. Scientists have studied what happens to habits during illness and found something quite tenderly revealing. When people are ill and confined to rest, many of their usual habitual routines are disrupted. The cues are absent, the contexts change, and after recovery, some habits, particularly newer, less established ones, may not return automatically. They need to be gently restarted. But older, deeply established habits often return quite quickly, almost of their own accord, as soon as the familiar contexts are restored. This tells us something about the different depths at which habits live. Some are shallow and easily disturbed. Others are deep and quiet, written into the brain so thoroughly that illness, rest, or even significant life disruption cannot fully erase them. They simply wait, quietly, for the right moment to resume. Fact 29. One of the most peaceful insights from habit science is the idea of habit stacking, the practice of attaching a new, desired behavior to an already existing, well-established habit. After I pour my morning coffee, I will sit quietly for 5 minutes. The existing habit, pouring coffee, serves as a reliable cue for the new one. Because the existing habit is already deeply automatic, its cue arrives reliably every morning, without any effort at all, and it carries the new habit gently along with it, like a strong current softly moving a small boat. The new habit borrows stability from the old one. It roots itself to something already known, already trusted, and in that borrowing, it finds its footing, slowly, peacefully, without struggle, slowly, gently. Fact 30. Researchers studying habits in animals have found that pigeons, rats, and even certain insects exhibit behaviors that look remarkably like habit formation. Rats trained to run a maze quickly develop automatic responses, running the familiar route without apparent conscious deliberation, their brains showing reduced activity. As the route becomes more practiced, this suggests that habit-like learning, the automatic repetition of successful behavioral sequences, is not unique to human beings. It is one of the most ancient and widespread strategies in the animal kingdom, across millions of years of evolution, across thousands of species. The quiet logic of repetition and automaticity has been discovered and rediscovered again and again. It is one of the oldest conversations life has ever had with itself, a conversation written not in words, but in the gentle language of repetition. Fact 31. Some researchers argue that the most powerful habits are not those built around specific outcomes, but those built around identity. Rather than, I want to run a marathon, the habit takes root more deeply when it connects to, I am someone who takes care of their body. The behavior flows from a quiet self-understanding rather than from a distant goal. And the habit, in this framing, is not a means to an end. It is an expression of who you are, or rather, who you are becoming. Each repetition is a small, quiet vote for a version of yourself that you are gently, steadily building, not through dramatic change, but through the patient accumulation of small, consistent actions, each one a quiet affirmation, each one a soft step in a direction you have chosen. Fact 32. The environment we live in is one of the most powerful and underappreciated forces in habit formation. Researchers who study behavioral change have found that redesigning the environment, making desired behaviors easier to begin and less desired behaviors harder, can be more effective than relying on willpower or motivation alone. Placing a book on the pillow makes reading before bed more likely. Putting fruit on the counter makes healthy eating more likely. These small, quiet rearrangements speak to the brain in the language of cues. They make the right path, the path of least resistance. They make the habit the easy thing, the natural thing, the thing the brain finds first when it looks for what to do next. The environment can be a gentle collaborator in the quiet work of building a good life, and we can take a moment to notice how soft and simple some of the most powerful ideas really are. Fact 33. Social environments are also deeply entwined with habit formation. The behaviors of the people around us serve as powerful, often invisible cues. Researchers have found that we are more likely to adopt the habits of those we feel close to, or those we see as similar to ourselves. This is not mere imitation. It is something deeper, something quieter. The brain observes what others do and gently updates its own sense of what is normal, what is expected, what is done, and those updated expectations quietly shape behavior. The people we spend time with are, in a very gentle sense, co-authors of our habits. Their presence weaves itself into the fabric of what we do and how we do it. This is why communities of people with shared habits, whether they are shared around health, creativity, or rest, can be so quietly powerful. Fact 34. Scientists have found that variation in behavior, doing things slightly differently each time, can actually slow habit formation. The brain forms stronger automatic associations when the behavior is performed in a consistent way, in a consistent context. Consistency is the quiet soil in which habits grow. If you change the details significantly each time, the place, the sequence, the brain has a harder time recognizing it as a pattern. But gentle, reliable consistency, the same quiet act, in the same quiet way, in the same quiet place, gives the brain something to hold on to, something to recognize, something to strengthen, slowly and steadily, with each repetition. Consistency is not rigidity. It is simply patience. It is the quiet faith that repetition, over time, builds something real. Fact 35. There is a concept called keystone habits. Habits that, when established, tend to quietly catalyze other positive changes, without any deliberate effort. Exercise is often cited as a keystone habit. People who begin exercising regularly often find, without planning for it, that they begin eating a little better, sleeping a little more soundly, feeling a little more settled. During their waking hours, the habit of exercise ripples outward, gently touching other areas of life. It creates small wins, quiet evidence that change is possible, and those small wins build a sense of momentum that gently carries over into other areas. Keystone habits are like a gentle stone, dropped into still water. The ripples move outward, slowly and quietly, touching shores that are far from where the stone fell. Fact 36. Researchers have studied the concept of willpower as a resource. sometimes called ego depletion. And while the science here has become more nuanced over time, the general principle, that deliberate self-control has limits, remains a useful one. When we rely heavily on conscious effort to maintain habits, we are drawing on a resource that can, to some degree, be temporarily depleted by overuse. Habits are, in a beautiful sense, the brain's way of getting around this limitation. A behavior that has become truly habitual requires almost no willpower at all. It simply happens. And so building habits is not just a practical strategy for getting things done. It is a kind of conservation of energy, a quiet act of kindness toward your future self, freeing up your deliberate attention for the moments that truly need it. There is no need to rush. Fact 37. Neuroscientists have found that the thickness of the cortex, the outer layer of the brain, in certain regions, can be influenced by repeated patterns of thought and behavior. People who meditate regularly, for example, show measurable differences in the thickness of regions associated with attention and self-awareness. And while this research is still being refined, it points to something deeply hopeful. The brain is physically shaped by what we repeatedly do and think. Habits leave literal, physical traces in the brain. They change not just the pathways, but the very structure. The brain grows, gently and gradually, into the shape of the life you practice. And that means that every quiet repetition, every small consistent choice, is a contribution to the kind of brain and the kind of person you are slowly, softly, and surely becoming. Fact 38. In the early stages of habit formation, the prefrontal cortex is heavily involved. It is watching, it is guiding, it is making deliberate decisions at each step. But as a habit becomes more established, a fascinating shift occurs. The prefrontal cortex begins to step back. It relaxes its close attention, and the basal ganglia takes over, running the habit with smooth, automatic efficiency. This shift is one of the most beautiful stories in neuroscience. It is the story of the brain learning to trust itself, learning that this particular sequence is safe, is reliable, is known, and so it hands the task over to the quiet, ancient part of itself that is built for exactly this kind of faithful, steady repetition. It is the brain's version of letting go, of trusting the process, of resting into what has been learned. Fact 39. There is something quietly fascinating about the relationship between emotion and habit. Habits formed in an emotional context, whether that emotion is positive or negative, tend to be stronger and more persistent than habits formed in neutral emotional states. The emotional coloring adds intensity to the neural trace. It makes the memory more vivid, more retrievable, more durable. This is part of why habits connected to comfort, a warm drink, a quiet ritual, a familiar song, can become so deeply ingrained. The brain associates the behavior, not just with the outcome, but with the feeling, and the feeling calls the behavior back, again and again, like a soft voice from a familiar room. Emotion is not the enemy of good habits. It is one of the brain's most powerful tools for keeping them, slowly, gently. Fact 40. Researchers studying habit change have found that the process of unlearning an old habit is different from the process of learning a new one. Old habits don't disappear. They are suppressed, or overlaid, or replaced by newer, stronger patterns. The old pathway in the brain remains. It is simply no longer the strongest road. It becomes quieter, used less often, overgrown just a little, but under certain conditions, stress, fatigue, the right cue, the old road can reopen, the old habit can return. This is not a failure. It is simply how the brain works, and knowing this invites compassion. When an old pattern reemerges, after you thought you'd left it behind, the brain is not broken. It is simply returning, briefly, to a familiar path, and you can, gently and without judgment, choose to walk a different way. Fact 41. Circadian rhythms, the body's internal clock, interact with habit formation. in beautiful and subtle ways. The body has a natural 24-hour cycle, driven largely by light and darkness, that regulates sleep, wakefulness, hunger, alertness, and mood, and habits that align with this natural rhythm tend to be easier to establish and maintain. A habit of waking gently at the same time each day, of eating at consistent times, of winding down as the light fades, works with the body's natural inclinations, rather than against them. The body is already moving through a rhythm. Habits that settle into that rhythm are like instruments that find the beat of a song already playing. They require less effort because the body is already flowing in that direction. Fact 42. The role of anticipation in habit loops is particularly interesting. Once a habit is well established, the brain begins to crave the reward before the routine even begins. The cue alone triggers a small wave of anticipatory pleasure. This is the brain saying, quietly, I know it's coming, and I'm already glad. Researchers have observed this anticipatory dopamine response in both human and animal studies, the reward signal arriving early, shifting forward in time. As the habit becomes more deeply ingrained, this forward movement of reward is part of what makes habits feel so compelling. The pleasure is not just at the end. It begins at the very beginning, at the moment the cue appears, and colors the entire experience with a soft, quiet glow of familiarity and comfort. And we can take a moment to notice the gentle anticipation of rest, already present in this moment. Fact 43. Research has shown that people who track their habits through a simple journal, a gentle checklist, or even just a mental note, are more likely to maintain them over time. There is something about the quiet act of noticing, of bringing conscious awareness to a behavior that is becoming automatic, that strengthens the habit's roots. The tracking doesn't need to be elaborate. A single small mark on a calendar, a quiet moment of reflection at the end of the day. Yes, I did that today. The act of noticing creates a small feedback loop of its own, a gentle acknowledgement that the behavior happened, that it mattered, that the path is being walked. And that acknowledgement, however simple, is a soft form of reward in itself. Fact 44. The concept of temptation bundling, developed by behavioral scientist Catherine Milkman, describes a gentle strategy for making habits more pleasant and therefore more sustainable. The idea is to pair an activity you want to do but don't always feel like doing with something you genuinely enjoy. Listening to an audiobook, only while taking a walk, enjoying a favorite warm drink, only while journaling. The enjoyable thing becomes part of the cue. Routine, reward loop, adding a layer of genuine pleasure to an already beneficial habit. The brain begins to associate the habit, not with effort, but with pleasure, not with obligation, but with something it actually looks forward to. And the habit, wrapped in this gentle warmth, becomes easier and easier to begin. Fact 45. Scientists have noted that habits can operate at very different scales of time and complexity. At the smallest scale, there are micro-habits, tiny, almost invisible behaviors that are so small, they require almost no effort to begin. Drinking 1 glass of water in the morning, taking 3 slow breaths before starting a task, writing a single sentence in a journal. These micro-habits matter more than their size suggests. They are the seeds of larger patterns. They establish the cue, routine, reward loop, in its most minimal form. And from that small beginning, larger behaviors can gradually be built. Starting small is not a lesser strategy. It is one of the wisest. A single, quiet seed, planted gently and tended patiently, can become something very beautiful over time. Fact 46. Physical exercise, beyond its well-known benefits for the body, has a gentle and profound effect on the brain's capacity to form habits. Exercise increases levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, often called BDNF, a protein that supports the growth and maintenance of neurons and their connections. Higher levels of BDNF make the brain more adaptable, more receptive to learning, and more capable of forming and strengthening neural pathways. In a very real sense, exercise prepares the brain to learn. It creates a neurological environment that is more fertile, more ready to grow. And so the habit of gentle, regular movement is not just a keystone habit because of its psychological benefits. It is a keystone habit because it literally makes the brain more capable of building other habits. There is no need to rush. Fact 47. The philosopher and psychologist William James, writing in the late 19th century, described habits as the flywheel of society, the quiet mechanism that keeps civilization turning smoothly, without requiring constant deliberate thought and decision-making. He wrote that habit simplifies movements, makes them accurate, and diminishes fatigue. And though he wrote long before modern neuroscience existed, his intuitions were remarkably aligned with what scientists would eventually discover. James understood, in a deeply human and thoughtful way, that habits are not weaknesses or laziness. They are one of the most elegant and essential features of the mind, the quiet engine that runs beneath the surface of everyday life, keeping things turning so that our deliberate attention can rest and look ahead and dream. Fact 48. Water has a habit too. In a metaphorical sense, given the same landscape, water will follow the same path. Time after time, it finds the groove it has worn for itself and flows along it naturally. And in this gentle image, we can see something of how our own behavioral habits work. The mind, like water, finds its grooves. It flows along the paths it has already made, not because it is limited, but because it is efficient. And just as water can be gently redirected, not by force, but by reshaping the landscape around it, our habits too can be gently redirected by changing the environment, by creating new channels for behavior to flow into, by patiently wearing a new groove in the landscape of daily life until the flow finds it and follows it naturally and inevitably. Fact 49. Sleep deprivation has a quietly significant effect on habitual behavior. When the brain is under-rested, the prefrontal cortex, already the brain's most energy-hungry region, is among the first to show reduced function. This means that the deliberate, reflective oversight that usually monitors and modulates habitual behavior is diminished. Old habits become more powerful. Automatic responses become more dominant. The brain, when tired, reaches even more strongly for the familiar, the automatic, the known. And this is not a flaw. It is the brain conserving its remaining resources. But it is also a gentle reminder of why rest matters so profoundly. A rested brain is a more flexible brain, a more intentional brain, a brain more capable of choosing thoughtfully, rather than simply following the oldest, deepest grooves, slowly, gently. Fact 50. Researchers have found that writing down a habit goal, not just thinking about it, but actually putting it in writing, significantly increases the likelihood of following through. This may be because the act of writing engages a different set of cognitive processes than simply thinking. It requires a more concrete commitment. It forces a clearer articulation of the intention, and there may be something quietly meaningful about the physical act of writing, the hand moving across the page, forming the words, leaving a visible, tangible trace of a commitment made. The written word has a kind of quiet permanence that a thought, floating loose in the mind, does not. And that permanence, that gentle solidity, may help the habit find firmer ground in which to root itself. Fact 51. The brain is remarkably plastic, meaning that it can change, adapt, and reorganize itself throughout life. This property, called neuroplasticity, was once thought to be limited mainly to childhood, but research over the past several decades has shown that the brain retains a meaningful capacity for change. Well into old age, new neural pathways can be formed. Old ones can be strengthened or allowed to weaken. New habits can be built. At any stage of life, the brain is never finished. It is always, in its quiet and patient way, responding to the experiences you give it, growing where it is exercised, changing where it is guided. The brain's openness to change doesn't diminish with age, as much as we once believed. It remains, throughout life, a living, responsive, beautifully adaptable organ. Fact 52. Nature itself offers a quiet parallel to habit formation. Migratory animals follow routes that their ancestors traveled before them, paths worn into the landscape of instinct. Across generations, salmon return to the rivers where they were born, navigating by magnetic field and smell. Monarch butterflies travel thousands of miles to forests they have never seen, but somehow know. These are the habits of species, behavioral patterns written, not in individual neural pathways, but in the genetic and cultural inheritance of entire lineages. And while the mechanisms are different from the habits of an individual human brain, the underlying logic is the same: repetition, pattern, and the quiet wisdom of knowing what works. The world is full of habits, at every scale, and we can take a moment to notice how quietly everything that is alive is following its own gentle patterns. Fact 53. Research on habit formation in children offers some of the most quietly beautiful insights in the field. Young children form habits with remarkable speed. Their brains, still in a period of heightened plasticity, are extraordinarily receptive to repeated patterns. Bedtime routines, for example, are not just comforting, they are neurologically significant. A consistent sequence of calming activities signals to the young brain that sleep is coming, and the brain begins its preparation, releasing melatonin, quieting its activity. In anticipation of that sleep, the routine itself becomes a cue. The sequence of bath, story, darkness, warmth becomes the signal that the brain recognizes and responds to. Night after night, the bedtime routine is, in a very real sense, one of the first and most beautiful habits a human being learns. Fact 54. There is something in habit science called the habit gradient, which refers to the observation that as we get closer to the end of a habitual routine, motivation and momentum tend to increase. The brain, sensing the reward approaching, adds a gentle urgency to the final steps. Athletes describe this as a finishing kick. For daily habits, it manifests as a subtle pull, the feeling of almost being done, which makes those final steps feel easier than the ones before. Understanding the habit gradient invites us to be gentle with ourselves at the beginning of a routine, when motivation may be lower, knowing that the momentum builds as we go. Starting is often the hardest part. Once begun, the habit's own gentle gravity tends to carry things forward toward completion. Fact 55. Scientists studying aging and habits have found something deeply encouraging. Older adults who maintain consistent daily routines show better cognitive health than those whose daily lives are more variable. Routine, the gentle predictability of regular habits, appears to provide a kind of scaffolding for cognitive function. The brain, guided by familiar patterns, can operate more smoothly and efficiently. This may also explain why disruptions to routine can be particularly disorienting for older adults, not because the brain is failing, but because the scaffolding has been temporarily removed. Consistent habits are not just good practices, they may be one of the gentlest and most powerful ways of caring for the brain. Across a lifetime, routine is not monotony, it is the quiet architecture of a well-maintained mind. Fact 56. The study of twin behavior has offered researchers a unique window into the relationship between genetics and habits. When researchers compare identical twins who share all of their genetic material with fraternal twins who share roughly half, they find that identical twins tend to show more similar habits, even when raised apart. This suggests that there is a genetic component to certain habitual tendencies, Some people may be naturally more inclined toward certain kinds of routine, or toward novelty seeking, or toward particular kinds of reward sensitivity. But genetics is not destiny. Even identical twins develop meaningfully different habits based on their unique experiences. The genes set the stage, but the habits are written in the quiet repetitions of a lived life. There is no need to rush. Fact 57. Researchers studying mindfulness, the practice of gentle, present moment awareness, have found that it interacts with habit formation in particularly interesting ways. Mindfulness doesn't necessarily make habits easier to form, but it appears to make them easier to observe. When you bring gentle, non-judgmental attention to your own behavior, you begin to notice the cues that trigger your habits, the routines that follow, and the rewards you are seeking. You see the loop from the inside, and that seeing, that quiet awareness, creates just enough space between the cue and the automatic response for a moment of conscious choice. Not always, not in every moment, but enough to notice, enough to sometimes choose differently. Mindfulness doesn't interrupt habits, it illuminates them. Fact 58. There is a gentle and fascinating phenomenon called state-dependent learning, which refers to the observation that memories and behaviors encoded in a particular physical or emotional state are most easily retrieved when you return to that same state. The brain, in part, uses context, including the body's internal state, as part of the cue for recall. This means that habits formed while feeling calm and settled are most readily available. When you are calm and settled, habits formed during alertness are most available during alertness, and this may be one of the many quiet reasons why a good night's sleep, a calm morning, and a settled emotional state create such fertile conditions for practicing and reinforcing new habits. The state of the body is part of the context of the habit. Fact 59. Scientists have found that merely watching someone else perform a behavior can, over time, influence our own habits, especially if that person is someone we admire, feel close to, or identify with. This is partly due to the action of mirror neurons, cells in the brain that activate, both when we perform an action and when we watch someone else perform it. The brain rehearses the behavior simply by observing it, and repeated observation, like repeated performance, gradually strengthens the neural traces associated with that behavior. We learn, in part, by watching. We are gently shaped, in part, by those we witness. The habits of people we love and admire seep into us quietly through the simple act of being near them and paying attention, slowly, gently. Fact 60. Language itself may have a quiet influence on habit formation. Researchers have found that people who talk to themselves during the learning of a new behavior, gently narrating the steps or affirming the intention, tend to perform the behavior more accurately and remember it more reliably. The words create a second channel of encoding. The behavior is stored, not just as a motor memory, but also as a verbal one, and the two memories reinforce each other. This may be part of why writing down intentions, or speaking them aloud, or quietly repeating a commitment to yourself, has measurable effects on follow-through. Language and action, working together, create a habit that is woven from two different kinds of thread, more complex, more layered, more resilient. Fact 61. We have touched on sleep before, and it is worth returning to it now, gently, as we move deeper into the night. Sleep is not simply the absence of wakefulness. It is an active, richly structured state in which the brain performs some of its most important work. During sleep, the brain cycles through different stages, including REM sleep, where vivid dreaming often occurs, and various stages of deep non-REM sleep, where the most powerful memory consolidation takes place. Habits learned during the day are quietly rehearsed and strengthened during these nocturnal cycles. The sleeping brain is not resting from learning. It is deepening it. Every night of good sleep is a gentle investment in the habits you are building during the day. Rest and practice are not opposites, they are partners. Fact 62. There's a soft and wonderful phenomenon in sleep science called targeted memory reactivation. Researchers have found that by gently exposing sleeping subjects to cues associated with previously learned skills, a scent, a quiet sound, during specific stages of sleep, they can enhance the consolidation of those skills. The cue activates the memory trace, and the sleeping brain strengthens it. The implications for habit formation are not fully worked out yet, but the possibility that sleep can be gently guided to prioritize certain memories is one of the most quietly remarkable ideas. In modern neuroscience, the sleeping brain is not just passively sorting, it is listening, it is responsive, and in its deep, still hours, it is doing important and delicate work, and we can take a moment to notice how close you may already be to that state. Fact 63. The brain's default mode network, a set of regions that become active when we are not focused on any particular external task, may play a subtle role in habit reflection and integration. When we daydream, or let our minds wander gently, or sit quietly without any specific focus, the default mode network comes to life, and researchers believe that this network is involved in consolidating experiences, making meaning from events, and integrating new information into our broader self-understanding. The quiet, unfocused moments of a day, the walks without destination, the slow mornings, the pauses between tasks, may be doing quiet, important work in the background, helping us to integrate what we've experienced, helping the habit find its place in the larger story of who we are. Fact 64. Napping, research has found, can support habit formation and memory consolidation in ways that are simple and gentle and available to almost everyone. Even a short nap, as brief as 10 to 20 minutes, during the afternoon, can provide a meaningful boost to the brain's capacity to retain and strengthen newly learned behaviors. The nap doesn't need to reach deep sleep to be beneficial. Even light sleep appears to provide some consolidation benefit, and longer naps, particularly those that include stages of deeper sleep, offer more substantial support. The body's wisdom is very simple here. When you rest, you learn better. When you sleep, what you have practiced becomes more deeply and reliably yours. Fact 65. The body's temperature plays a quiet role in sleep, and through sleep, in habit formation. Core body temperature naturally begins to drop in the early evening, signaling to the brain that sleep is approaching. This temperature drop helps trigger the release of melatonin, the brain's gentle sleep hormone. Habits that support this natural cooling: a warm bath in the evening, which paradoxically helps by causing the skin to radiate heat and cool the core; a calm, dimly lit environment; a quiet, gentle routine that eases the transition from day to night. All work with the body's own biology to create the conditions for good, restorative sleep. And good, restorative sleep, as we've seen, is one of the most powerful things we can do for the habits we're trying to build. Fact 66. Researchers studying the neuroscience of rituals, sequences of behaviors performed in the same way, for a meaningful or comforting reason, have found that rituals share many structural features with habits. They have a consistent sequence. They are often tied to specific contexts or times. They create a sense of order and predictability, and they frequently provide a kind of emotional reward, a sense of calm, of grounding, of connection to something larger than the immediate moment. Athletes perform pre-game rituals to settle their nervous systems. Musicians perform warming-up rituals to prepare their minds and hands. Families gather around dinner tables in ways that have been the same for years. Rituals are habits that carry extra meaning, habits that have been decorated with intention. There is no need to rush. Fact 67. The relationship between habit and creativity is more collaborative than many people expect. There is sometimes a sense that habits and routines are the enemies of creative thinking, that creativity requires freedom from structure. But many creative people have found the opposite to be true. A reliable routine, a consistent time and place for creative work, a regular practice of showing up, creates the conditions in which creativity can flourish. The habit removes the friction of beginning. It eliminates the daily decision of whether to do the work. The creative mind is freed from those preliminary negotiations and can move more directly into the work itself. Structure and freedom are not opposites. In creative life, they're often, quietly, the best of friends. Fact 68. There's a beautiful and simple concept called the 2-minute rule, which suggests that when building a new habit, the initial version of the habit should take no more than 2 minutes to begin. Not to complete, just to begin. The 2-minute version of a reading habit is opening the book. The 2-minute version of a running habit is putting on the shoes. The 2-minute version of a meditation practice is sitting down and closing the eyes. What happens after those 2 minutes may unfold naturally, or may not, but the important thing is that the beginning has happened. The cue has been answered. The loop has started. And often, beginning is the only thing that needs to happen, because the momentum of beginning carries everything else gently forward. Fact 69. The concept of delayed gratification is deeply connected to habit formation. Research beginning with the famous marshmallow studies of the 1960s and 1970s has explored how the ability to wait for a larger, later reward, rather than accepting a smaller, immediate one, is connected to many long-term outcomes. But more recent research has added nuance. The capacity for delayed gratification is itself shaped by experience and environment. It can be cultivated, and habits are one of the primary ways it develops. Each time a person performs a habit that has delayed benefits, exercise, sleep, quiet reading, they are practicing the experience of acting in service of a future self. The habit trains the brain, gently and repeatedly, to take the long view, to trust that patience is worthwhile. Slowly, gently. Fact 70. Researchers have found that habits can persist, even through profound changes in the brain. Patients with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia who have lost access to many explicit memories and find conscious learning very difficult often retain habitual behaviors far longer than other kinds of memory. A person who can no longer remember what they had for breakfast may still navigate the morning routine of their home with quiet, habitual ease. The body knows the way, even when the conscious mind cannot find it. This is both moving and remarkable. It tells us that habits, at their most deeply established, are woven into the very fabric of how the brain and body work. They are among the last things to go, among the most enduring expressions of a life lived. Fact 71. Even plants, in their quiet and rooted way, exhibit something like habits. Many plants grow their roots along paths that have previously been successful, following moisture gradients, growing more densely in directions where the soil has proven nourishing. They don't have brains, they don't have neurons, but they respond to experience in ways that cause repeated, directional behavior. Some researchers call this plant memory. The way a plant's current growth is shaped by its past responses to its environment. It is not habit, in the human sense, but it is a reminder that the underlying logic of responding to experience, of doing more of what works and less of what doesn't, is woven into life at every level, not just in brains, but in roots, in stems, in the slow reach toward light. Fact 72. The ocean moves in rhythms that are among the oldest and most consistent patterns on Earth. Tides rise and fall, currents flow in their ancient circular paths. The deep ocean moves in a vast, slow circulation that takes centuries to complete a single loop. These are not habits in the biological sense, but they are patterns, repeated, reliable, governed by consistent forces. And there's something deeply calming about knowing that the world is full of these patterns. The sun rises and sets, the seasons turn, the stars move through their slow arcs. Everywhere we look, if we look gently, we see repetition, we see rhythm, we see the universe practicing its own kind of quiet automaticity, doing what it has always done, in the way it has always done it, with a constancy that is both ancient and entirely new, every single time. And we can take a moment to notice the quiet patterns that surround us. Fact 73. Birds that sing at dawn are following one of the most beautiful and consistent habits in the natural world. The dawn chorus, the explosion of birdsong that begins before sunrise, is a deeply habitual behavior. Individual birds return to the same singing posts day after day. They sing in roughly the same sequence. They respond to the same light cue, the first gray-blue brightening of the eastern sky, and the song itself is, in many species, a learned behavior. Young birds listen to adult males and gradually acquire the song of their species, their population, and eventually, their own individual variation. Even birdsong is built, in part, through repetition, through the patient, daily practice of a small creature singing into the darkness, learning its song, one day at a time. Fact 74. The migration of birds is another extraordinary example of deep behavioral patterns that are partly instinctual and partly learned. Young birds, on their first migration, navigate using magnetic fields, star patterns, and inherited maps, but they also learn from experience, refining their routes, remembering successful rest stops, adjusting to conditions. Over time, individual birds develop what might be called a personal migration habit, a reliable sequence of routes, timing, and rest sites that they follow year after year. These are not conscious plans. They are deeply ingrained behavioral patterns, shaped by genetics, learning, and repetition. The swallow that returns to the same barn every spring is, in its own quiet way, following a habit as deep and reliable as any the human brain has ever formed. Fact 75. Bees navigate back to their hive through a process that combines innate ability and learned habit. A forager bee, when it discovers a new food source, returns to the hive and performs a waggle dance, a remarkable communication behavior that conveys the direction and distance of the food, but the bee's own foraging route, the specific path it takes, the flowers it visits, the sequence of its journey, becomes more and more habitual. Over time, the bee returns to the same flowers at the same times, with increasing efficiency and reliability. The foraging route becomes worn into the bee's behavioral repertoire, just as a path is worn into a landscape by repeated footsteps. Even a creature with a brain smaller than a sesame seed participates, in its own miniature way, in the ancient logic of habit. There is no need to rush. Fact 76. The deep sea is one of the most consistent environments on Earth, far from the surface, removed from the variability of light and season. The deep ocean maintains a remarkable steadiness of temperature, pressure, and chemical composition, and the creatures that live there have evolved extraordinarily consistent, patterned behaviors suited to that constancy. Some deep-sea fish follow the same vertical migration every day, rising toward the surface at dusk to feed and sinking back into the depths at dawn, day after day, their entire lives. A quiet, ancient habit written into the rhythm of an organism that has never seen sunlight. It's a reminder that habit and pattern are not products of complexity. They arise wherever life finds reliable conditions and learns to move within them. Fact 77. Wolves are creatures of habit in ways that are both practical and strangely peaceful to consider. A wolf pack tends to travel the same routes through its territory, day after day, season after season. These routes are worn into the landscape and into the behavioral patterns of the pack. Pups learn the routes by following their elders. The routes connect food sources, water, shelter, and safe passage. They are the accumulated wisdom of many generations, transmitted not in language, but in the quiet repetition of following, paw by paw, through snow and rain, and the long light of summer evenings. The route is the habit, and the habit is the knowledge of how to live safely in a particular piece of the world. Fact 78. Elephants are known to travel the same ancient paths across vast landscapes, paths that have been walked by their herds for generations, perhaps for centuries. These elephant paths connect water sources, mineral licks, seasonal food areas, and safe passages through difficult terrain. The matriarch of the herd carries the knowledge of these routes in her memory, and the younger elephants follow. When the matriarch dies, the loss of that knowledge can be significant. The herd may struggle to find resources it once navigated too easily. The elephant path is more than a habit. It is a library, a living record of successful routes through a complex world, maintained through the faithful repetition of following, generation after generation, across decades and landscapes, and the long, slow turning of seasons. Slowly, gently. Fact 79. Rivers carve their own paths through landscape, and once established, they tend to follow those paths with extraordinary persistence. A river bends where it has always bent. It deposits sediment where it has always deposited. The shape of a river's course is the record of its own history. Every curve and meander, a product of repeated flow. Over time, and when the river floods and briefly escapes its channel, it tends, over time, to return, to find its own path again. Because the path is lower, the soil is softer, the resistance is less. The old channel is the path of least resistance, and so the river returns to its habit, naturally, inevitably, without deliberation, simply following the pull of the landscape it has spent centuries making for itself. Fact 80. Seasons themselves are among the most ancient and reliable patterns in the natural world. The tilt of the Earth, held constant by the physics of its orbit, causes the same sequence of warming and cooling, lengthening and shortening of days to repeat with extraordinary precision. Year after year, life has evolved to read this pattern and respond to it. Habitually, trees lose their leaves. At the same time each year, bears accumulate fat and seek their dens. In the same season, flowers bloom. When the light reaches a certain intensity and duration, the living world is tuned to this great annual rhythm, and every organism's response to it is a kind of species-level habit built across evolutionary time. The world is a creature of habit at every scale. Fact 81. Gravity is, in a sense, the universe's most ancient habit. Every massive object in the universe attracts every other. It has always done so. It will always do so. The behavior is perfectly consistent, perfectly reliable, utterly without exception. Planets orbit their stars because gravity has always pulled them that way. Moons circle planets. Galaxies spiral around their centers. The universe, in its vast and ancient operation, follows the quiet, consistent rules of physics with a fidelity that makes even the most deeply ingrained human habit seem brief and tentative by comparison. And there's something deeply calming about this. The universe itself is, at its core, a place of reliable patterns, of consistent behavior. of the same gentle forces, acting the same quiet way, across billions of years and billions of light years of space. And we can take a moment to notice how still and reliable the forces that hold everything together truly are. Fact 82. Light itself, in its consistent and beautiful behavior, offers a kind of cosmic parallel to habit. Light always travels at the same speed, in a vacuum, approximately 300,000 kilometers per second. Without exception, without variation, this constancy is one of the foundational facts of physics. It is so reliable that it forms the bedrock of Einstein's special theory of relativity. The universe, it turns out, is built on habits, on consistent behaviors that can be relied upon completely. The speed of light, the force of gravity, the laws of thermodynamics. These are not coincidences. They are the universe's deepest and most reliable patterns, the habits of reality itself, without which nothing else could exist in any consistent or predictable form. Fact 83. Atoms themselves are creatures of habit. The electrons surrounding an atomic nucleus occupy specific energy levels, shells, orbits, and they don't just randomly wander. They follow precise rules about which energy levels they can occupy, how they transition between levels, and what happens when they absorb or release energy. The behavior of electrons is so consistent, so perfectly repeatable, that it forms the basis of chemistry, and therefore of all of biology, and all of life. Every habit in every brain rests ultimately on the faithful, habitual behavior of atoms, the chemistry of the body, the neurotransmitters, the hormone signaling, the energy metabolism that powers every thought, is built on the quiet, ancient, perfectly reliable habits of the subatomic world. Fact 84. The rotation of the Earth is itself a habit of sorts, a consistent, repeating motion that has been in place for over 4 billion years. The planet turns at very nearly the same rate every day, though it is slowing, almost imperceptibly, over geological time. The day-night cycle, the fundamental rhythm of life on Earth, is a product of this rotation, and every habit that is tied to time of day, every circadian rhythm, every morning routine, every evening wind down, is, in the end, synchronized with the quiet turning of the planet beneath our feet. We are not just creatures of habit. In our own small lives, we are habit creatures, tuned to the great habits of the Earth itself, turning, slowly and reliably, through the darkness and the light. Fact 85. Stars have life cycles that repeat, with variations, across the universe. A cloud of gas and dust collapses under gravity. A star ignites. It burns for millions or billions of years, fusing hydrogen into helium. At its core, when the hydrogen is spent, it shifts to other fuels, expands, and eventually ends in a gentle fade for smaller stars, in a more dramatic collapse for larger ones. The ashes of that star, the heavy elements forged in its core, seed the next generation of stars and planets. The cycle repeats. Stars are born, live, and die, and from their deaths, new stars are born. It is one of the universe's most profound and beautiful habits, the patient recycling of matter across cosmic time, building complexity, slowly, gently, one star at a time. There is no need to rush. Fact 86. Water follows the same great cycle. It has always followed. On Earth, rain falls. It flows into rivers. Rivers carry it to the sea. The sun evaporates it from the surface of the ocean, and it rises into the atmosphere. As water vapor, clouds form. Rain falls again. The same water molecules that fall tonight as rain may once have flowed through a river in ancient Rome, or drifted as cloud over the Himalayan peaks, or been drunk by a dinosaur beside a shallow prehistoric lake. The water cycle is one of the Earth's most beautiful habits. a patient, continuous loop, driven by the sun and by gravity that has been turning, without interruption, for billions of years. Every drop of rain is an old traveler, following a very familiar path. Fact 87. The moon's orbit, around the Earth, follows the same elliptical path. It has traced, for billions of years, its gentle influence on the Earth's tides. The twice-daily rising and falling of sea level has shaped the evolution of life. In the intertidal zones, the behavior of countless marine creatures, the navigation of ancient sailors, and the calendars of civilizations, the moon's cycle of phases, new to full and back again, in roughly 29.5 days, has been one of the most reliable clocks in human history. Farmers planted by it, festivals were timed to it, and still, every night, the moon rises, in its gentle, familiar arc across the sky, following its ancient habit, keeping its faithful rhythm, as it has, since long before there were eyes to see it. Fact 88. The seasons of other planets follow their own reliable patterns. Mars has a year of roughly 687 Earth days, and it has seasons, driven by the tilt of its axis, just as Earth does. Saturn's rings, though dynamic at the smallest scale, maintain their overall structure with remarkable consistency across human timescales. Jupiter's Great Red Spot, a storm larger than Earth, has been observed for centuries, a persistent and quietly astonishing atmospheric habit. The solar system is not a chaotic place, it is a deeply patterned one, a place of reliable orbits, consistent rhythms, and ancient, patient habits of motion and energy that have been in place since the solar system's formation, billions of years ago. Slowly, gently. Fact 89. The electromagnetic spectrum, the full range of light, from radio waves to gamma rays, behaves with perfect consistency across the entire observable universe. Radio waves travel at the same speed as visible light. X-rays obey the same rules of reflection and refraction. The behavior of light is a habit so universal and so consistent that it allows astronomers to study stars billions of light years away and know, with confidence, what those stars are made of, how fast they are moving, and how hot they are burning. The universe speaks in light, and light speaks in habits, in the consistent, repeating patterns of wave and particle that carry information across the vast, dark distances of space to the quiet eyes of those who look up and wonder. Fact 90. Black holes, among the most extreme objects in the universe, also follow entirely consistent and predictable rules. The behavior of matter and energy near a black hole, the way it falls, spirals, heats, and eventually vanishes beyond the event horizon, follows the same physical laws. Everywhere in the universe, a black hole in one galaxy behaves the same way as a black hole in another galaxy, billions of light years away. Even in the most extreme environments the universe contains, the underlying habits of physics remain constant and reliable. This consistency, this absolute faithfulness of physical law, is what makes science possible. It is what allows the universe to be known, to be understood, to be, in some deep and quiet sense, trusted. Fact 91. The heart beats with a rhythm that is one of the most reliable and comforting patterns in human experience. From the earliest days, in the womb, when the heart begins its first tentative beats, around 3 weeks after conception, to the very last breath, the heart repeats its quiet cycle without interruption. In a lifetime of 70 years, the average human heart beats approximately 2.5 billion times. Each beat, a small, faithful repetition, each one almost exactly like the one before. The heart, in its patient and unceasing rhythm, is the body's most ancient habit, and there is something deeply calming about knowing that right now. As you listen, your heart is beating, quietly, steadily, following a pattern. It has followed every moment of your existence, and we can take a moment to notice the quiet rhythm already present within you. Fact 92. Breathing is another of the body's most beautiful and fundamental habits. The respiratory system maintains its rhythm almost entirely without conscious attention. The brainstem monitors carbon dioxide levels in the blood and adjusts the breathing rate accordingly, moment by moment, throughout the day and night. When you sleep, your breathing slows. When you exert yourself, it quickens, but it never stops. And interestingly, breathing is one of the very few automatic bodily habits that can be consciously overridden. You can choose, right now, to take a slow, deep breath, and in doing so, you are gently stepping into the flow of one of the body's oldest and most faithful patterns. Breathing is the meeting place of the voluntary and the involuntary, the conscious and the automatic, the chosen and the given. Fact 93. The kidneys filter the blood with quiet, extraordinary consistency. Every single day, the kidneys process approximately 180 liters of blood, filtering it, reabsorbing what is needed, and allowing the rest to become urine. They adjust the composition of the blood with remarkable precision, maintaining the balance of sodium, potassium, water, and acid with only tiny variations across a wide range of conditions. The kidneys don't think about this. They don't decide. They simply do what they have always done, what the body has been doing since long before any of the organs we associate with thinking or feeling existed. The kidneys are practicing the oldest kind of habit, the quiet, faithful, essential repetition of a process that keeps everything else possible. Fact 94. The liver performs over 500 different functions in the body, detoxifying the blood, producing bile for digestion, synthesizing proteins, storing glycogen, and many more. And it does all of these things simultaneously, without pause, throughout every hour of every day of a human life. The liver is, in a very real sense, the body's most multitasking, habitual organ. It doesn't plan its workload. It doesn't schedule its functions. It simply responds to the moment-by-moment signals of the body's needs and maintains its extraordinary range of activities with quiet, faithful consistency. The liver is a reminder that the most complex and impressive performances are not necessarily the most dramatic ones. They are often the most quiet, the most consistent, the most patient. Fact 95. The cells of the body engage in their own quiet, repetitive behaviors. Nerve cells maintain a voltage difference across their membranes, the resting membrane potential, with exquisite care, continuously pumping ions in and out to maintain the exact balance needed for signaling. Red blood cells travel their circuits through the vascular system, delivering oxygen and returning to the lungs over and over for their brief 120-day lifespan. Immune cells patrol the body's tissues, following the same careful routes, looking for the same familiar kinds of threats. At the cellular level, the body is an intricate network of tiny, faithful habits, each cell doing what it does, consistently and quietly, contributing its small, specific part to the larger whole. There is no need to rush. Fact 96. Even the DNA within our cells follows precise, habitual processes. The machinery of DNA replication, a complex assembly of proteins that copies the genetic code every time a cell divides, makes on average only one error per billion base pairs copied. The proofreading mechanisms that monitor and correct errors are themselves consistent, habitual processes. The machinery of protein synthesis, reading the genetic code and assembling proteins follows exact, consistent rules that have been essentially the same in all life on Earth for billions of years. The genetic code itself is a habit of life, a consistent set of rules for translating nucleic acid sequences into protein sequences that has been followed faithfully and without exception by every living cell on Earth for nearly 4 billion years. Fact 97. The body's immune memory is one of the most beautiful forms of biological habit. When the immune system encounters a pathogen for the first time, it mounts a response, recognizing the threat, producing antibodies, and eventually clearing the infection. But it also creates memory cells, long-lived immune cells, that remember the specific features of that pathogen. If the same pathogen appears again, the immune memory cells respond far more quickly and powerfully than the first time. The body has formed a habit, a pattern of recognition and response that has been stored and can be rapidly retrieved when the familiar threat reappears. Vaccination works by providing the immune system with a safe version of this experience, giving it something to remember, a habit to form, before the real threat ever arrives. Fact 98. The sleep-wake cycle is one of the body's most fundamental habits, and also one of the most ancient. Single-celled organisms show circadian rhythms. Plants open and close their flowers on a daily cycle. Insects, fish, reptiles, birds, and mammals all show consistent patterns of activity and rest, governed by internal biological clocks. In humans, this clock is centered in a tiny region of the hypothalamus, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a structure containing only about 20,000 neurons, but capable of keeping near-perfect 24-hour time. The body's sleep habit is older than humanity, older than mammals, older perhaps than most of the complexity of life on Earth. It is one of the most ancient habits in all of biology, and right now, yours is quietly, gently, drawing you toward rest. Slowly, gently. Fact 99. The face we wear in familiar company is itself partly a habit. Researchers studying facial expression have found that the expressions we make most often become over time easier and more automatic. Muscles that have been repeatedly used in a particular configuration develop greater efficiency in making that configuration. People who smile often develop greater fluency in smiling. People who furrow their brows in concentration find that expression more automatic. Over time, there is a beautiful and gentle implication here. The emotional expressions we practice, whether in response to the world or in the privacy of our own quiet moments, become more available, more ready, more natural. Over time, habitual kindness, habitual calm, habitual gentleness. These are not just choices. Over time, they become the face that you wear. Fact 100. Touch is one of the most powerful cues for habitual comfort and calm. The gentle touch of a familiar hand, a favorite blanket, a smooth stone carried in a pocket. These sensory experiences can serve as powerful cues for emotional and physiological calming. Researchers have found that gentle touch reduces cortisol levels, slows heart rate, and activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, that is the body's gentle counterpart to the fight or flight response. And when a particular touch is repeatedly associated with calm, a soft pillow at the end of the day, a warm cup in the hands before sleep, it becomes a cue, in its own right, a gentle tactile invitation to the body and brain to relax, to settle, to begin the quiet preparation for rest. Fact 101. Language itself is built on habit. The ability to speak and understand a language fluently is in many ways the most elaborate habitual skill a human being possesses. Every fluent speaker has automated thousands of grammatical patterns, thousands of word associations, thousands of phonological sequences, to the point where producing and understanding language requires minimal conscious effort. When you are reading these words, your brain is performing extraordinary feats of pattern recognition, syntactic analysis, and semantic integration, all automatically, all at once, all without any deliberate attention. You have practiced reading so many thousands of times that it flows as naturally as breathing. Language is the habit of meaning-making, and it is perhaps the most beautiful and uniquely human habit of all. And we can take a moment to notice how effortlessly these words are finding their way to you. Fact 102. Memory is deeply interwoven with habit. The brain's memory systems include not just the explicit declarative memory that stores facts and events, but also the implicit procedural memory that stores habits and skills. These two systems are somewhat independent, stored in different brain regions, accessible through different pathways, and interestingly, they can sometimes work against each other, trying to consciously recall the exact steps of a well-practiced habit, the precise sequence of keystrokes in a familiar typing pattern, for example, can actually disrupt the automatic performance of that habit. The deliberate conscious memory system interferes with the smooth, automatic operation of the habitual one. This is sometimes called the centipede's dilemma. The centipede who, when asked how it manages all its legs, becomes so conscious of the question that it trips. Fact 103. The process of forgetting, often thought of as a failure of memory, is actually an important and active part of how the brain organizes its experience. The brain doesn't passively lose memories. Over time, it actively deprioritizes information that isn't being regularly accessed, or that doesn't have strong emotional or contextual associations. This pruning process helps the brain remain efficient, keeping the most relevant and useful patterns strong, while allowing less used ones to fade. And for habits, this means that habits, which are regularly practiced, remain strong and accessible, while habits that are abandoned gradually weaken. The brain is always, quietly and sensibly, investing its maintenance resources in whatever you are consistently doing. It maintains what is used. It gently lets go of what is not. Fact 104. The phenomenon of flow, that state of effortless, absorbed engagement in an activity, is deeply connected to habit. Flow states tend to occur when a person is performing a skill that is well practiced enough to be partly automatic, but still challenging enough to require genuine engagement. The habit provides the foundation, the automated elements that run without deliberate effort. The challenge provides the engagement that keeps conscious attention active and present. In flow, the habitual and the deliberate work together in perfect balance. The automatic carries the technical elements. The conscious guides and adapts and responds, and the result is a feeling of effortless ease and deep absorption that many people describe as one of the most satisfying experiences available to a human being. Fact 105. Numbers and their patterns have a kind of habitual quality that the human mind finds deeply satisfying. We recognize the pattern of counting. We feel the satisfying logic of multiplication tables. We find comfort in the predictability of arithmetic. And there is something beautiful about the way numbers follow their rules with perfect, unwavering consistency. 2 plus 2 has always been 4. It always will be. The patterns of mathematics are the most reliable habits in existence, not products of repetition and learning, but of logical necessity. And the human brain, shaped by evolution to find and follow patterns, finds in mathematics a kind of deep and quiet satisfaction. The pleasure of a pattern recognized, the comfort of a rule reliably applied. There is no need to rush. Fact 106. Music works its way into us. Through habit, a song heard repeatedly becomes deeply embedded. We can often recall a melody after hearing it only a handful of times. And after many hearings, it becomes nearly impossible to forget. The brain stores music in a particularly durable way, distributed across many regions, and resistant to damage or decay. People with advanced Alzheimer's, who can no longer recognize family members, can often still sing the songs of their youth. The musical memory persists. When almost everything else is gone, music is woven into the brain's deepest patterns. It lives in the body as much as in the mind, triggering rhythmic movement, emotional response, and a sense of familiarity and recognition that is almost impossible to resist. Music is perhaps the most beautiful habit the brain can form. Fact 107. Reading is a habit that rewires the brain in lasting and beautiful ways. Children who learn to read undergo measurable changes in neural connectivity, particularly in the regions linking visual processing, language, and attention. The reading brain develops specialized pathways that allow it to recognize words at a glance, rather than decoding each letter individually. This process, called orthographic mapping, is a form of deep habit formation, as the visual pattern of each word becomes automatically associated with its sound and meaning. A fluent reader doesn't sound out words consciously. The word activates its sound and meaning instantly, automatically, as a single perceptual unit. Reading fluency is one of the most elegant and important habits a human mind can form, and one of the most quietly transformative. Fact 108. The habit of attention, where and how we direct our conscious awareness, shapes our experience of the world more profoundly than almost anything else. We notice what we habitually notice. We attend to what we have learned to attend to. A musician hears things in a piece of music that a non-musician might miss. A gardener sees things in a landscape that others walk past without registering. A parent notices the subtle signs of a child's mood in ways that an uninvested observer would not. Our habits of attention are the lens through which we experience reality, and because they are habits formed through repetition and practice, they can be gently changed. We can learn to notice new things. We can practice attending differently. We can slowly and quietly train our attention to find what matters most. Slowly, gently. Fact 109. Kindness, researchers have found, can itself become habitual. Studies on prosocial behavior, helping, giving, comforting, have found that people who engage in acts of kindness regularly find it increasingly natural and automatic over time. The behavior becomes associated with positive internal rewards, a warm feeling, a sense of meaning, a quiet satisfaction that reinforce the loop. And over time, the habitual kind person is not someone who has to work hard to be kind. They are someone for whom kindness has become the path of least resistance, the automatic response to a situation where another person's need is visible. Kindness practiced becomes kindness that flows, and there are few habits more beautiful or more worth the quiet investment of repetition than that. Fact 110. Gratitude, like kindness, can become a habit, and research suggests that when it does, it has measurable effects on well-being, sleep, and even physical health. People who practice noticing and acknowledging what they're grateful for through a journal, a quiet reflection before sleep, or simply a moment of appreciation in the midst of the day, tend over time to develop a more habitual orientation toward the positive aspects of their experience. The brain, trained to look for things to be grateful for, begins to find them more automatically. The habit of gratitude doesn't require that everything in life be good. It simply trains the attention to notice and value what is good amid whatever else may be present. And that gentle noticing becomes over time a way of moving through the world. Fact 111. The concept of a practice. In music, in meditation, in art, in sport, in any discipline, is really just another name for the long, patient cultivation of a habit. A practice is a habit given intention, a habit given meaning. When you practice something, truly practice it, consistently over time, you are not just improving a skill, you are shaping a part of who you are. The musician who has practiced scales every day for 30 years is not just technically proficient, they are someone whose relationship with sound, with timing, with expression has been quietly shaped by decades of quiet, faithful repetition. The practice becomes part of them. It lives in their hands, their ears, their sense of time. A practice is a habit that has been held long enough to become part of the self, and we can take a moment to notice the long and quiet arc of a life, built one small repetition at a time. Fact 112. Researchers studying the lives of people who have maintained healthy habits across decades have found some common threads. One of the most consistent is the absence of heroic effort. Long-term habit maintainers tend not to describe their habits as things they have to force themselves to do. They describe them as simply part of their day, part of who they are. The struggle, if there ever was one, was in the beginning, in the early weeks and months, when the habit was new and the neural pathway was still being formed. But once the habit became established, once the groove was worn, the road was clear. The habit simply carried itself. The long-term story of a good habit is not one of constant effort. It is one of a difficult beginning, and then a long, quiet ease. Fact 113. The passing of knowledge across generations is itself a kind of civilizational habit, a pattern of teaching and learning that has been repeated, in some form, for as long as human beings have existed. Each generation learns from the one before. Skills are transmitted. Practices are passed on. The habit of a grandmother's cooking finds its way into the hands of a grandchild. The habit of an artisan's craft is quietly absorbed by an apprentice through years of watching and practice and gentle repetition. Human culture is, in a very deep sense, a collection of shared habits, behavioral patterns that have been refined and transmitted over time, shaped by the experience of many generations, maintained by the quiet daily practice of countless individuals who may never think of themselves as carriers of tradition, but they are. Fact 114. The writing of a book is, for most writers, a deeply habitual process. Successful authors often describe a consistent routine, a specific time, a specific place, a specific ritual of preparation that signals to the brain that it is time to write. The habit of showing up, day after day, at the writing desk, regardless of inspiration, creates the conditions in which writing can happen. The muse, it turns out, is mostly a habit. Most creative work is produced not in flashes of inspiration, but in the quiet, consistent accumulation of a daily practice. 1 page a day becomes a book in a year. 1 paragraph a day becomes an essay in a month. The habit does not wait for inspiration. It creates the space in which inspiration, when it comes, can land. Fact 115. Researchers studying centenarians, people who live to 100 years or more, have found that many of them share a common trait: consistent daily routines. They wake at the same time. They move their bodies in the same gentle ways. They eat at regular intervals. They rest with intention. They maintain social connections through reliable, habitual patterns of contact and conversation. The long-lived life, it seems, is often a deeply habitual one, not boring, rich and full, and alive, but patterned, consistent, anchored in the steady rhythm of daily practice. The body and mind, supported by the quiet scaffolding of good habits, are freed to be present and engaged and alive without spending energy on the question of what to do next. They already know. There is no need to rush. Fact 116. There is a quiet beauty in the idea that every expert, in any field, was once a complete beginner. Every concert pianist once played their first, hesitant scale. Every gifted surgeon once held a scalpel with uncertain hands. Every graceful dancer once stumbled through their first steps. Expertise is not a gift. It is the accumulated product of thousands of hours of quiet, patient, sometimes frustrating, sometimes joyful practice. The habits of expertise are built through repetition, over time, in the same gentle way that any habit is built. One practice at a time, one day at a time, one quiet repetition after another. The distance between beginner and expert is not talent. It is simply time and patience, and the willingness to keep returning to the practice. Fact 117. The final frontier of habit science may be the habits of thought itself. Research in cognitive psychology and neuroscience is increasingly focused on the idea that our characteristic ways of thinking, the patterns of interpretation, attribution, and response that shape our inner life, are themselves habitual. A person who habitually interprets ambiguous social situations as friendly will have a different emotional life than one who habitually interprets them as threatening. A person who habitually responds to setbacks with curiosity will have a different experience of difficulty than one who habitually responds with self-criticism. These thinking habits are the deepest habits of all, and the most hopeful finding in this area is also the most gentle. They can change, slowly, with practice, with patience, and with compassionate attention. The habits of the mind can be reshaped. Fact 118. Happiness itself, researchers have suggested, may have a habitual component. Certain patterns of thought and attention, noticing the good, engaging with the present moment, finding meaning in daily activities, maintaining genuine connection with others, appear to support well-being when practiced consistently. These are not things that happen automatically for most people. They require a kind of deliberate practice, at first, a choosing to notice, a choosing to engage. But over time, with repetition, these ways of attending to life can become more natural, more automatic. The brain learns to move in these directions more readily. The path is worn a little clearer each day, and happiness, or something close to it, something steady and quiet and real, becomes a little more available, a little more like home. Fact 119. The longest habits of all are the ones we share with every living thing on earth. The habit of breathing, the habit of seeking warmth, the habit of moving toward light, the habit of rest. These are not habits in the sense of learned routines. They are the deep biological imperatives that have been built into life over billions of years of evolution. But they remind us that we are not separate from the rest of the living world. We share the most fundamental patterns with the oldest and simplest organisms on Earth. And in the end, the science of habits brings us back, again and again, to the same quiet and beautiful truth: that we are pattern-making creatures, that we are built for repetition, that we are shaped by what we do again and again, gently and patiently, across time. Slowly, gently. Fact 120. And finally, perhaps the most peaceful and quietly wonderful fact of all. Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is forming habits. Not through any effort, not through any deliberate decision. Simply by being here, in this calm and quiet space, allowing the gentle rhythm of these words to wash over you. You are reinforcing the habit of rest, the habit of stillness, the habit of lying down at the end of the day and letting the world slow, and the thoughts soften, and the body release its held tensions one by one. Every time you practice this, returning to stillness, returning to quiet, returning to rest, you make the path a little clearer, a little easier to find the next time. You are, right now, in this very moment, doing exactly what the brain loves most. Practicing something so gently and so consistently that one day, it simply happens, all on its own, as naturally and as quietly as breathing, as beautifully and as faithfully as a heartbeat. And so, we have traveled a long and quiet way together tonight, through the deep pathways of the brain, through the gentle architecture of the habit loop, through forests of repeating patterns and oceans of ancient rhythms, through the faithful habits of atoms and stars, and the quiet turning of the earth. We have visited the slow migration of birds, and the deep-worn paths of elephants, and the faithfully beating heart, and the sleeping brain working gently through the night, to weave new patterns into the fabric of a life. And we can take a moment to notice how much has settled, how much quieter things feel now than they did when you first lay down. The habit of sleep, one of the oldest and most beautiful habits in all of the living world, is already at work. The body is cooling, the breath is slowing, the thoughts are becoming softer, further apart, less distinct. There is nothing more to figure out tonight. There is no problem to solve. There is only this quiet, this stillness, this gentle, faithful rhythm of your own breathing. The brain has done its work for today, and now it is ready to do its other work, the deep and patient work of sleep, the quiet work of weaving today's small repetitions into tomorrow's slightly stronger pathways. Let the thoughts drift, like leaves on still water, like stars moving slowly through a dark and peaceful sky. You have everything you need. You are exactly where you should be. Slowly, gently. There is no need to rush. Let the habit of rest carry you now. It knows the way. It has always known the way. Good night. Sleep well. And if this video brought you any peace tonight, any softness, any gentle company in the quiet hours, a like and a subscribe would mean the world, so that others somewhere might find their way here too. And rest. Good night.